Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, really good to be back with the Gevurah in Toronto. And like I said, we were going to now move into some basic introductions, into what Panemius Satorah is coming to convey to us. And it just so happens that on the precipice of Tu B'Shvat, celebration of the trees, the Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanos, so we're going to focus in on a very important introduction, something that many of you are familiar with. Many are exposed to these ideas in numerous ways. You've seen the phrases, but ultimately, it serves us very well to return back to first principles. I'm thinking very much about the words of the Ramchal in his introduction to Mesilas Yesharim, where he writes that there's a tendency in the world to have a temptation, a craving for new information, new ideas, chadashot, new insight. And that's no different than any other physical craving for newness, for more forms of pleasure, more forms of capital. Because the truth of the matter is that it's not new information that we need. We don't need to go out searching for new insights that we don't already know. What we have to do is we have to remember that which we already know. Because information that becomes so habituated within our minds, concepts that we feel we've heard already or we know them already. So what happens is that a person begins to get so accustomed to them that they forget to pay attention. And when we forget to pay attention, we stop experiencing the wonder of these ideas. And the ideas remain the same, the words remain the same, but they don't bring us life anymore. So says the Ramchal, all I'm here to do is to remind you of what you already know. I'm here to remind you about the information that is already at your fingertips, to reveal back to you the wondrous nature of that information that you already know. And that's how he begins Mesilas Yesharim. The concept at the core of Panemius Satorah, or the building blocks, is the concept of the spheros. The 10 spheros through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself in reality. Spheros have an etymological root in the language of mispar, number. It also is rooted in sipur, a narrative. It's also sapir, like a sapphire that shines in its translucency. And it's also sofer, something that's being written. All of these definitions of sphira or sefer reveals to us a little bit about what these 10 spheros are. On the one hand, they're considered as numbers. Because before HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself through the spheros, all that exists is infinitude. And infinity exceeds all numbers. To apply a number to infinity would be to make infinity finite. And so infinity by its nature denies the capacity to apply any numbers or classifications or definitions to it. The spheros are the secret mechanism that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created to enable a fluid passage between the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that exists before the creation of the world and the finite worlds of creation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create. This is ultimately the main question at the heart of Kabbalah, is how can it be that an infinite God, a oneness of God, not one in a number line, but a oneness that exceeds the possibility of numbers, how that infinite light can interact with a finite reality, with worlds of physicality and constriction and containment and differentiation. This is the ultimate question. How do we make sense out of Hashem being infinite and the world and us being finite? Now, there are many, many different spiritual paths that offer very simple answers, but one side of the equation is going to be affected. There are paths that affirm the infinity of Hashem, and they deny that the finite reality has any actuality to it. So then you don't really have such a question of how the infinite becomes finite, because all there is the infinite. You have other forms of spirituality which deny the infinite, and they say all that there is finite. You have other paganistic paths that look at finite reality and say this is infinite, God forbid. But in any attempt to kind of cross that unbridgeable space of infinitude and finite reality, Yiddishkeit comes and offers a singularly unique answer, which is the 10 spheros. The spheros are the interface, the story that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells, the narrative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu coming into reality, revealing himself in reality, but at the same point, never losing his infinite nature. So the spheros are the numbers of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol. They're the limitation of Hashem's infinite light. Its infinity now being measured by way of numeric form. But as we're going to see, the nature of the spheros is such that even though it's being counted, and even though each sphera represents something different, in the end of the day, what remains the same no matter what is the infinite nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light that is shining through the spheros themselves. So not only are they the numbers through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses to create difference, they're also the story of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself in this world. And even though they appear to be containers and difference and separation, they shine in translucency like a sapphire. And so we see how the three definitions of spheros, a number, a story, a narrative, and a translucency of a sapphire, all apply to what we're going to try and describe. It's the story of HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealing himself within differentiation and numbers, but at the same point realizing how all of the difference is translucent with the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite presence. The Ramak asks a very important question. What are the spheros? Spheros are a very ancient idea, way earlier than the Arizal. And the question is, what are they? Are the spheros the essence of God's infinite light? Sorry, Gevurah. Are the spheros the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light? Sorry, I don't even know how to turn this off. No, it'll go off in a second. I'm sorry. The spheros, the question is, are the spheros the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light? Are they atzmus, or are they vessels? Are they kelim for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light? So this becomes the first point of the question. What are these spheros? What is this interface? What are these 10 vessels through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is revealing his infinite light? Are they Hashem himself, so to speak? Or are they vessels that contain the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself? So two polar opposite possibilities. The first possibility we're going to point out as wrong, and the second possibility we're going to point out as wrong. The spheros are neither the essence of God's light, nor are they separate from the essence of God's light. To say that the spheros are the essence of God's light, God forbid, is a problem. Why is it a problem? Because God's light is simple and unified in the greatest manner of simplicity imaginable. Any word that's uttered to try and define Hashem's infinitude is already a limitation. The only vessel that we have to convey the greatness and the expansivity and the infinite nature of Hashem's infinitude is realizing that we can't describe it, and we can't grasp it, and we can't speak about it. So to come and say that Hashem has taken his infinite light and now divided it into 10 sparks of infinite light is tantamount to real heresy. It's creating pirud, it's creating separation within the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's unity, which is something that the Torah HaKadosha comes to fight against on every level. The Torah at its core is coming to tell us that there are no idols and no material depictions of the infinite light of Hashem. Avram Avinu was the first person to break the idols, the first iconoclast, because Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is so profoundly lofty and so infinite that the only thing that we can say about it is that it's there, but we have no ability to grasp it. So to say that the 10 spheros are God himself, God forbid, becomes a very dangerous idea. The other side is also equally problematic. To say that the spheros are just vessels that HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses is also to minimize the value of the spheros, because when we look in the Zohar, when we look in the Kavanos of Tefillah, when we look at how we function as human beings, we understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself in different ways. There's different ways in which Hashem reveals himself to me. There's different qualities, different traits. And for me to claim that those things are completely disconnected from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then what exactly am I relating to? When I relate to the spheros, when I daven, and I'm aware that there's a process of spheros, obviously they're not God himself, but what are they? Are they just material objects? Are they concealed forms of measurement that remain separated from the infinite? That also becomes problematic. That's creating more of a period. So the Ramak explains very clearly that the spheros actually occupy a middle territory between these two options. They're not the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, nor are they separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite light. They represent an intermediary space through which the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu can reveal itself and express itself in differentiated form. That the spheros are neither atzmus nor kalim. They're a translucent casing for the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinitude to shine forth through them, which means that it's still a singular light. The light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always singular, but the vessels through which it's going to be revealed are differentiated. The Ramak gives two examples for this. One is the sunlight that's shining through different colored glass, that when you look at the glass, you see differentiation of color, but the singular ray of sunshine that's coming through it is the same no matter what. The glass is not what's revealing the light to me. It's not the 10 different shades of glass that are revealing the light. The light is revealing the light. The light is shining through those 10 different colors. And because it's shining through 10 different colors, the light takes on a different hue. The light takes on a different emphasis. When we look at that metaphor, we see that the source of light remains one. The source of light is not becoming more than one, God forbid. And the vessels themselves, even though they're lenses through which light is going to be shown, they're not the thing giving me the light. Without the sunlight, the vessels are empty. They're devoid of any content. And so we see from this metaphor that the real work is being done by the unified light. It just so happens that when there's 10 differentiated colors, that light can be revealed in different ways. Another example that the Ramak gives is that the spheros operate like 10 different glasses of water, 10 different shapes that can hold the water, a singular form of water, a singular expression of inundation of water, but based on the vessel that's going to be holding the water is going to appear differently. When I'm drinking the water, it's not different water in each vessel. The vessel is what's different. The water is the same. And so from both of these metaphors, we see what the Ramak is teaching us, and this is really what the Arizal picks up on, is that the spheros are neither God nor are they not God. They're 10 midos that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has revealed within the world that serve as the lenses through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be able to reveal his light. Now, in the worlds and in the olamot, the spheros are the architecture. They're the architecture of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself, the 10 spheros. But what the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh came along to do for us is to teach us that you can spend all day and all night studying the architectural plans of how the world is made. But that's not necessarily going to bring you in contact with the ideas that are being described there. It's like reading a menu. And if you're reading a menu in the hopes of quelling your appetite, you're going to be very frustrated. And so the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh came along and said, forget about looking up there so much. Understand that everything that is true up there is taking place within you at the very same moment. And this is not only an innovation of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, this is an innovation of the Ramchal and the Gra as well. But what the Baal Shem Tov teaches us is that if you want to understand the spheros, me besari echaze Elokai. From my flesh I shall behold HaKadosh Baruch Hu. From my own human experience, that's how I'm going to come to understand these 10 spheros. And that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to get to a place where we talk about the partsufim and the worlds and how it works up there. But for now, we're going to begin with a metaphor of the spheros for how it works with us. The spheros in general are broken up into 3 categories. There's 10 spheros, and those 10 spheros are broken up in accordance to 3 lines. There's a right line, there's a left line, and there's a middle line. Just as our bodies have a right arm, a left arm, and a torso, so too, that's reflective of that which is taking place above, which is that Hashem reveals himself by way of a cheder. Cheder is Roshei Tevos, Chesed, Din, and Rachamim. Chesed represents the right side of things, Din represents the left side of things, and Rachamim represents the middle pillar that unifies both of those polarities. Now, this modality is not unique necessarily to Pnimiyas HaTorah. Even logic is developed based on these same principles, that there's a thesis, which is the postulation of an idea. Then there's an antithesis, which comes and pushes back against the postulation of that idea. And then in order to make space for both of those contradictory opinions, there's a synthesis that makes shape out of both of those sides. And this is true in the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself. The right side represents expansivity. Hashem wants to be mashpia, Hashem wants to flow, Hashem wants to reveal himself. The left side represents Gevurah, constriction, containment, the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs to make vessels to hold that light. The middle pillar is what happens when we make a balance between lights and vessels, so as to ensure that there's a healthy measure of stability that's being expressed. Now, in terms of our own bodily orientation, let's go through the 10 spheros, and then we're going to see how they uncover themselves and unfold within our lives in any given moment. And with a better understanding of how they're happening in our lives, we'll be able to then go back and look at the worlds and look at the partsufim and look at all of it up there and see how it makes sense. So the first sphera is Kesser. Kesser is the top of the middle line, which represents itself within the cranium, the skull. Underneath Kesser, on the right side, comes Chochmah, which is the right brain of wisdom. To the left of Chochmah is Binah, which is the left brain of understanding and separation. Then the neck represents kind of a pseudo-sphera, which is a bridge between the mind and the heart, which we call das, knowledge, but we're going to put that in parentheses for now. Then we see the same pattern repeated, except now on an emotional level. That right side of Chochmah expresses itself as the right arm of Chesed. That left brain of Binah expresses itself as the left arm of Gevurah and constriction. And in between those two, you're going to have something referred to as Tiferet, harmony that occupies kind of the torso area. So we have the upper triad of Chochmah, Binah, and Das, the middle triad of Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet. And then the third triad is also going to express itself in the same way, where the right side is going to be Netzach, the left side is going to be Hod, and the middle is going to be the Yesod. And so what we see in the organization of the tree of the spheros, the Eitz HaChaim, is that it's 3-3-3. That there's Chochmah, Binah, Das, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. Then the final sphera is going to be Malchut. And so let's make sense out of this. Let's see how this process unfolds in one fell swoop of a narrative. Let's say I want to build a house for myself. Prior to building the house, there's nothingness. There's nothing that appears. In order for there to be an awakening of a desire to build a house, A person has to first and foremost imagine the pleasure and the goodness and the ease and the comfort that's going to come into their lives by building the house. That quality of tainug, that quality of pleasure, which is the motivating factor behind anything we do in this world. What pushes us out of bed in the morning, what pushes us to each and every encounter is the expectation of some element of pleasure that's going to come about by it. It doesn't necessarily have to be physiological pleasure. It's not necessarily a dopamine secretion, but some element of pleasure, of meaningful living, of purposeful living, of carrying out my responsibilities. Pleasure, the anticipation of pleasure is the beginning of the engine of creativity. That's tainug. That's the inner quality of Kesser. Tainug is not something that we feel. Tainug is something that in its true root is rooted in the loftiest places. That pleasure then gives way to the next step, which is ratzon, desire. When I anticipate pleasure as a result of something, my mind then opens itself up into the desire to carry that thing out. So Kesser, there's two levels of Kesser. There's the upper level of Kesser, which is tainug, which is pleasure. And there's the lower level of Kesser, which is ratzon and desire. What that means to say is that it is a desire that is awoken by the deep sense of pleasure that's going to arrive afterwards. The Rebbe Rashab of Lubavitch spent hundreds of pages describing in Hemshech Samach Vav which one is really driving Kesser. Is it tainug or is it ratzon? Is it ratzon or is it tainug? Is it pleasure or will? Is it will or pleasure? And ultimately, it's elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. It's the will towards pleasure and the pleasure of having a desire. But that's really the ultimate motivating force that creates any source of expression. Hashem wanted to be mit'aneg from the world. Hashem wanted us to serve him in this world so as to create a sense of spiritual bliss for the Jewish heart as well as for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The motivating factor behind expression is Kesser. Rav Itchemeyer describes it as follows. These two levels can be compared to an individual who, on the one hand, feels that they have this deep desire to catch a bus. I need to catch a bus. I need to catch a bus. I need to catch a bus. And when I have the desire to catch a bus, I'm running to catch that bus. I'm bothered by the fact that I haven't caught that bus yet. But on the innermost quality of Kesser, there's also a deep sense that I'm already on the bus that I'm trying to catch. So Kesser is the pleasure of being on a bus already, and also the cultivation of a desire to get somewhere else. And those two motivating factors, tainug and ratzon, are the awakening of consciousness. Any desire to express ourselves is rooted in that place. But at that point, all I have is the expectation of the pleasure that will come about by way of building a home, and the desire to have a home built. On that level, it's still completely transcendent. It's not actualized. It's not defined. There's no actuality to it. And so what happens afterwards is the right brain of Chochmah comes into the picture. And the right brain of Chochmah sees things in a holistic way. Chochmah is seeing everything in one fell swoop, like a sudden thunderbolt of insight that sheds light on everything that I could possibly need. In that thunderbolt of Chochmah, I suddenly see exactly what the house is going to look like. I have the perfect image of how I need to build a house so as to bring about that pleasure that I truly desire. The problem with Chochmah and the right brain alone is that while it conveys a very bright picture of something, it dissipates just as quickly. The sudden burst of insight goes away, and I'm almost left with nothing. Chochmah is koach ma. It's the potential to see a certain what, to envision a certain bigness, a greatness that I know I want, that I see in my mind, but I don't necessarily have any understanding of how this is actually going to take shape. And so in order to make sure that that mindset, that burst of Chochmah is not for naught and is not wasted, so then there's going to be the left brain of Binah. The left brain of Binah is very different than the right brain of Chochmah. The right brain of Chochmah sees everything in a holistic way. It sees no differentiation. It sees no contradiction. It sees no problems. It's rooted in nothingness. Binah, understanding, is already taking apart that original burst of enthusiasm, taking apart that idea, seeing the different steps that are going to be necessary so as to actualize this plan. Figuring out hamevin davar mitoch davar, understanding one thing from another thing, and cutting the idea down into bite-sized pieces so that I can figure out what needs to be done here. Because if I see the door built and the windows built and the walls built and the roof built and the floors built and the siding built and the back built all at once, then there's nothing that can actually take place because nothing's going to get the process started. Binah is the dissection of that original burst of inspiration that now has departed. And it's the slow and steady work of breaking it down into bite-sized, manageable pieces of information. Binah already is a funny thing. Binah is still a clarified space in the mind, but it's utilizing severity. It's utilizing a strength of thought that has the ability to cut through issues, to discern what's what, to understand what's imperative and what's inessential. In the mindset of Chochmah, there's no differentiation. It's only through the perspective of Binah and the discernment of Binah that I have the ability of making havchanos, making separations so that I can begin to understand how this thing has to happen in my life. That's why when it comes to Binah, the Zohar HaKadosh says, Binah dinin misabrin mineh. That when it comes to Binah, severity emerges from within that place. Even though it's a lofty place in the mind, it's a cognitive tool. Nevertheless, anytime I'm cutting reality into different pieces and different size, I'm bringing myself into contact with pirud. I'm bringing myself into contact with constriction. So we have the desire that's rooted in pleasure, and then the general picture of how something is going to happen. And then we have the equally important process of breaking down that original picture into bite-sized manageable pieces and steps so that I know what I need to do in order to start. Now, Chochmah and Binah are always connected. You never have one without the other. We always have this ability to have a big idea and then to figure out how to draw that big idea into smaller bite-sized pieces. There's never a time where those two are operating in a state of separation. The Zohar HaKadosh says about Chochmah and Binah that hein train rein deloy misparshin. They're two lovers that never depart from one another. Very much like a father and a mother. The masculine form of Chochmah expresses a germ cell of an idea, the potential of an idea, and the womb of the mother, Eim Habanim Samecha, is what allows that idea to gestate and to develop and to form so that it can become something formidable and real. Without Binah, all you have is Zera Levatala. You just have, wasted potential. It's Binah that holds it and it forms it and it shapes it and it enables it to kind of take shape in something real. But those two states of mind are still profoundly rooted in the mind. They're cognitive states. And the question is, how do we draw down that cognition and that development of an idea into the next stage of actualization? Because like we said, the entire story of the spheros is how the infinite comes into finite reality. And even when it's in finite reality, it doesn't lose its essential quality of being infinite. So it's not enough to just have ideas. We have to bring the ideas even further down so as to figure out how to relate to them in this world itself. This world has its spheros of Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Yesod, and Malchut. That's the body. But the question is, how do you get from the head into the body? Because as the Kotzker Rebbe points out, the longest distance in the entire world is between the head and the heart. And Amalek comes to attack us specifically by the neck, and Paro rests by the neck, and Bilam HaRasha is by the neck. All of the klipos, all of the chitzonius, all of the things that cause us to feel so separated and apart are ultimately attacking our das. Das is the neck of connectivity. It's what enables the moichin, consciousness, and the development of ideas that are rooted in that desire to bring about that ultimate pleasure that I envisioned at the outset. Das is this paradoxical bridge, the Gesher Tsar Ma'od Ma'od, the very, very narrow bridge that must articulate the wisdom of the idealized Moichin and bring it down into the reality of real lived experience. And so Das is the bridge that takes that original burst of enthusiasm of Chochmah, the development of the idea in particular forms through Binah, and it now is being drawn down into the heart. It's now becoming, what do I need to do practically about this? A person can live with ideas in their head their entire lives, and it's not going to do anything. A person can live with Chochmah and Binah alone, and it's not going to do anything. The tachlis that Hashem wants is to reveal himself in the lowest place imaginable, which is within our own inner lives, within our emotions, within what it feels like to be a human being who's sometimes stuck in a world where Hashem's revelation is not clear. And so Das is the bridge, it's the connection that allows for a bridging of the moichin of Chochmah Binah to now come down into the heart. And so the next thing, once I've developed and I've gone through my mind of Binah, and I've discerned what needs to be done and what needs to not be done, so now Chesed is an extension of Chochmah. Chochmah sees everything as unified. Chesed wants to give. Chesed wants to expand. Chesed wants to move outwards. It wants to do something. Once I've discerned what needs to be done, now I'm ready to run to Home Depot to buy whatever it is that I need to buy. But in a Chesed mindset, there's no restriction. It's just yes. It's a yes saying. There's no limitation there. I need this and I need that and I need this and I need that and I also need this and I also need that. And oh, I thought I was going to work on the door today, but I'm also going to work on the window. And in Chesed alone, the person is activated to want to go out and actually begin to do something. But we're also inundated by the notion of how much there is to do. Avraham Avinu was Chesed. Avram Avinu loved Chesed so much that he couldn't sit by the entrance of the tent and receive Pnei HaShechina, because he was so motivated to go and do more, feed more people, open the door more. When Chesed is unqualified, when Chesed is not utilized properly, it gives birth to unhealthy expression, unhealthy forms of sharing, illicit relationships, trying to place ourselves in places that we shouldn't be. When the Torah HaKadosh is describing arayos, illicit relationships, it refers to it as ki chesed hu. That the problem here is that it's a chesed. Isn't chesed a good thing? Olam chesed yibana. But the nature of chesed is that when a person is overextending themselves too much, sharing too much, giving too much without restriction, so it's going to be destructive rather than conducive and conductive of growth. And so just as Chochmah alone is not enough, it has to be measured by Binah, so too Chesed, this desire, I run to the store, I run to Home Depot, and I see everything in front of me, and I say, oh my God, I need everything. Gevurah is the left hand that comes and says, wait a second, I don't need everything. And even if I want everything, I can't have everything. And I'm going to need to be able to discern and specify and to choose the particular things that I need at this given moment. The midah of Gevurah contains the flow of Chesed. It ensures that Chesed is going to be expressing itself within some element of measure or vessels, not this over inundation of expression, but rather a very pinpointed mission of sharing. And so Gevurah is a saying no. Gevurah, like Yitzchak Avinu, is the Pachad Yitzchak. There's a fear over there. Yitzchak Avinu doesn't move. Yitzchak Avinu doesn't travel outside of Eretz Yisrael. By the Akedah, Yitzchak Avinu says to Avraham, tie me tighter. Gevurah requires constriction, limitation. And so if Chesed is me showing up at the store and wanting to buy everything in order to build this house, Gevurah is hyper-focusing on the task at hand and limiting what I can buy, understanding that I can't buy everything. That's the midah of Yitzchak. Now, obviously, Gevurah is not destructive. Gevurah is not saying no to Chesed. Gevurah is containing Chesed so that it can actually express itself in a reasonable way. And then comes the synthesis between the two, which is the midah of Tiferet, which is the midah of Yaakov Avinu, which is the balancing between Chesed and Gevurah. I want everything, but I also know I can't have everything. And so these are the things that I'm going to settle on. And when a person settles on a Tiferet type of orientation, it's not that, oh, I still want everything, but I know I have to be a good boy because I can't have it all. That's just constricting Chesed. Tiferet is coming to a place of realizing that this is what I need right now. It's the balance between grandiose expectations and reality testing. Finding a place, a simple, unified place where I want everything, I know I can't have everything, and I'm going to have to settle with this very simple balance of what I need right now. That's the midah of Yaakov Avinu. Avram Avinu, when he extends himself too far out, it becomes the klipa of Yishmael. Ki chesedhu, illicit relations. As the Gemara tells us that Tisha Kaven Shel Znus Yarda L'Olam and Asara Kaven Shel Znus Yarda L'Olam, 10 measures of illicit relationships have come into the world, and Yishmael took 9 of them. That's the problem with Chesed, too much expression. The problem with Yitzchak, when it's too much constriction, is Esav, Al-Char B'Chatichya, murder, destruction, the inability to tolerate something else's existence. Only Yaakov Avinu is mitaso shalim. Only Yaakov Avinu, who has that midah of Tiferet, that balancing act between the two extremes, is the secret of the scale of balance, the mitgala. And only there are we going to find that there's continuity. Only there are we going to find that the Shvatim were able to say that just as in your heart there's only one, so too in our hearts there's only one. But that's still prior to actualization. The levels of Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet are more embodied states of consciousness. They're more felt experiences, but they're not yet activated. They're not yet externalized. They're still taking place on the inside of who I am. The mind is the very inner place where it begins, and the body and the heart represents the processing internally that's getting ready for actual revelation. Because like we said, every 10 spheros is there to reveal something, to bring something out into existence, to reveal more infinite light of Hashem. And so here's where we come to the final triad of the spheros. Not the Chochmah and the Binah and the Das, not the Chesed and the Gevurah and the Tiferet, but here we're coming to the Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. But as we see already, there's a pattern here. The first triad is the right side of Chochmah, the left side of Binah, and the middle point of Das. The lower triad of the heart is the right point of Chesed, the left point of Gevurah, and the midpoint of Tiferet. And then we're going to have that same iteration take place at the lower third, which is going to be Netzach, which is an extension from Chesed and Chochmah on the right side, Hod, which is an extension of Gevurah and Binah on the left side, and Yesod, which is an extension of Tiferet, Das, and Kesser on the middle pillar. When we come to Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, this is where we've bought the stuff at the store. We've come to that equanimity, that Tiferet place of what we need to do and the materials that we need. And then I come home and I see that there's this blank canvas there. And so Netzach is the desire to overcome whatever prevention is there in front of me and to begin actualization, to put the tools to work, to begin the building. That's Netzach. Netzach is an overcoming of the self, overcoming restrictions. Nitzchias is also connected to Netzach as victory, because something that's truly victorious is something that doesn't have to prove itself to be victorious anymore. True victory is not victory when I've gotten rid of 90% of the problem and I leave 10% of the problem. True victory is when I've gotten rid of all of the problem. And in each and every given circumstance, a person is able to push on through it to the other side and begin the process of actualization. That's Netzach. That's when I come home and I have my tools and I'm ready to actually put pedal to the metal and begin to build. But if I'm still only oriented to that right side of my brain, which wants to do, and I have no restriction and I feel that I can work all day and all night and I don't need to drink any water and I don't need to prepare myself, so that very quickly is going to lead to breakdown. And so Hod comes along on the left side and it reminds us of surrender. It reminds us to come in contact with the powerlessness that we truly have, and that we can't finish everything, and we don't have to finish everything, and that we're human beings and it's not our job to finish everything. So Netzach is that sense of power that I have to move outwards and continue to push. And Hod is that inner quality of powerlessness where I realize that it's not my power. The power is not coming from me. And that balance ultimately leads to Yesod. That leads to a point of contact. That leads to a point of, I now know what I need to do. I can connect. I can begin building. Malchus is the lowest sphera because that's when things begin to actualize themselves. Malchus is externalization. Malchus is the end result when I finally take that hammer and I hit it against the nail. That's Malchus. Because all of the processes that preceded that were the original pleasure that emerged within my mind, which cultivated a desire to go out to see what I need to do in order to awaken that pleasure. Then there is the original burst of wisdom that tells me how it's all going to look. Then there's the breakdown of that idea that discerns and differentiates the idea for me so that I know the step-by-step process. Then I have to draw that conscious awareness into practicality. Then I have to go out and begin to figure out what I need to do this. That's my chesed. Then I have to figure out the limitations and why I can't have everything. And then I come to a place of connectivity, which is Tiferet. And then I'm ready to push on through to the next side, to come back home and to figure out what needs to be done. I see what I want to do today. That's my Netzach. I realize what I'm not able to do today. That's my Hod. My Yesod is when I'm finally ready to give myself over, finally ready to be mashpia myself, finally ready, like Yosef HaTzadik, to bring something out into fruition, to be fruitful in this world. And all of that motivating process then reveals itself in my ability to lift my hand with a hammer and the nail on the ground, then to nail it in. That's Malchus. That's when the inner process expresses itself externally. Now, Malchus is the lowest. It's externalization. It's the body. It's this worldliness. But at the same point, we know that soif ma'aseh b'machshava tchila, that the end result is first in thought. The true thing that awoke in our desire towards this whole thing was the pleasure that we would experience when the thing became actualized. So paradoxically, it's specifically in the lowest places in our lives, in the embodied experience of being a human being in this world, in eating and walking and drinking and being a human being and being a parent and being a spouse and being a worker and being a boss or in being an employee. It's in this world itself that we ultimately get to reveal the first in thought, last in action, which is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to reveal him down here. Every activity that we engage in, every step that we take to be more present in the world, whether it's mitzvos maisios, or real good deeds, or picking up a piece of garbage, or working out, or making a bracha, or eating slower and tasting the food a little bit deeper, that's Malchus. And that's the ultimate purpose behind everything. And so this is a brief story of the 10 spheros as they unfold within the individual themselves. But the same is true with regards to how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is revealing himself. That Hashem has this infinite light. And suddenly it arose within HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mind that what would be pleasurable for him was if the Jewish people down here in this world were able to recognize him. Hashem realized that there would be a great pleasure that comes about when things that feel opposite from his light would be able to admit to his light. And from that point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu awoken a will in his mind to create the world. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in one fell swoop, in pure potential, Bereshis. Unkala says, B'chochmah, with Chochmah. It was all in the beginning, it was Tohu Vavohu, everything together, everything at once. Then the 7 days of creation are the process of Binah, separating one thing into its place, to differentiate. Then Das is the beginning of Hashem's desire for how the world is really going to go. The Pagam of Das was the Dor HaMabul, with the flood where the world had to be redone. And then Avram Avinu came along. He was Chesed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu now had a right hand that knew how to reveal itself in this world. And then Avram Avinu needed a Yitzchak to build Klal Yisrael, and then there had to be a Yaakov. And then the Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, these processes, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef. And then ultimately, what leads to the eventual rectification of all of existence is the light of Mashiach, which is the light of Malchus. Now, these 10 spheros can be found in every single thing. There's no entity in existence that doesn't contain within itself these 10 spheros. Everything is fractalized. The 10 spheros are ultimately the fact that every single thing has a top, middle, and a bottom, or a right, left, and a center. And each of those also have their own subset of three. So each third has its own three qualities to it. The right side has a right, left, and a center. The left side has a right, left, and a center. And the middle has a right, left, and a center, which is 9. And then when you have this pure potential of 9, there's something that takes shape. And that space that it occupies is the 10th. That's the 10 spheros. Every entity in existence, every person, every thought is all composed of these 10 spheros. And what we're going to see is how the worlds are built out of these 10 spheros, and how each and every person, when they contemplate these spheros, they can think about different names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu associated with those spheros, different colors associated with those spheros, different points of history associated with those spheros. A person will begin to look at their lives and realize, well, a red light tells me to stop. Red is Gevurah. White tells me goodness. That's why doctors' coats are whites. That's why milk is white, the whiteness of the snow. Tiferet is this quality of balance, and we begin to see how it's actually from within opposites that beauty emerges. Netzach is endurance, is victory. We begin to see strength, working out, doing what we need to do. Which areas of my life are oriented towards Netzach? A person also has to hold themselves with Hod, which is bittul, which is self-nullification, which is knowing my limitations, cultivating a mindset of gratitude. Yesod is, what do I want to connect myself to? What do I want to disconnect myself to? It's a very delicate area of true connectivity, and a person can only be truly connected to one thing at any given moment. And Malchut is ultimately the secret of how everything that's revealed in front of us, everything that we see, all of the external reality in this world is ultimately just the end result of a far greater process that's been at play for a very long time, coming into revelation. The Sefiros teach us that everything in the world is telling HaKadosh Baruch Hu's story. All of existence is telling Hashem's story. Our lives is telling our stories. And with these Sefiros, we begin to understand the basic building blocks of what the Partsufim are going to be, what the Olamos are, and what it means to be a human being whose job is to be conscious of God in this world. These are the building blocks. And Be'ezras Hashem, so we'll go from the Sefiros, and we'll move on, Mirz Hashem, to more insight into the spheros, the names associated with the spheros, the concepts, and what this preliminary stage of the building blocks of the spheros do for us as we get to the next stage, B'ezras Hashem, of Kabbalah Sa'arizal.